Hi, my name is Ian. I am Joel Trupin's grandson, and yeah, I'm just really happy to welcome everybody here. The weather's getting a little bit cooler, and it's just so good to see all the people who have come from around the neighborhood and from even many states away. It's just really heartwarming and such a beautiful demonstration of how my grandfather brought so many people together and touched so many people's lives. So really excited to see everyone here. Really grateful for everyone who's coming to celebrate my grandfather.
Can I still get that seat?
Yeah, Chris Teal is a dear family friend, longtime next-door neighbor for decades in Nashville, who's now in Boston. And yeah, well, you heard for yourselves, and I hope we'll be hearing more a little bit. So yeah, I think, you know, I hope folks are getting a chance to get some food, some refreshments. Pretty soon here we'll be just sharing some stories. Some folks have prepared a few things to say, and we'll be starting off with my sister Rebecca. So I hope we'll have a lot of those. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So thanks all of you for being here. It's a bit of a shock to see so many faces that I haven't seen for such a while all together in the same place. So I'm still sort of getting over that, but it's really exciting to see everyone. Thank you for making, in many cases, a really long trip to get here. And thanks, of course, for the people who are from here coming out and also helping with the setup and putting all of this together. So I guess I want to begin with one thing that is, most people, I think, do not get to know their grandparents as well as my brother and I got to know ours. So I consider ourselves extremely lucky. They've been there for every major event of our lives, and then we also got the benefit of living with them for all of my high school time in Nashville, and so had a chance to get really close to Joel and to Kathy. And so as I said, my grandfather he's been part of my life from the very beginning. I don't have a first memory of him, but he was there at the hospital when I was born. And in fact, it seems he was so eager to be involved in the action that he got himself admitted with a gut problem. So he actually came to see me coming in toting his IV in order to see me. And since then we've had a bit of a family joke and we discovered that we're both extremely stubborn. We don't really change our viewpoint, but that's fine because that's part of the sport of it. And yeah, so I would say that this theme of social justice, to come back to that, the underlying theme for my grandfather, I think, is his strong interest in people. He's always had a really keen interest in anybody he meets. I don't think he's met an uninteresting person. He always takes an interest. And I've had the experience that when I introduce friends to him, he'll get a look on his face. He'll lean forward. He'll start to smile slightly. He'll start asking them questions. He will hold their attention because his attention is so focused on them. He will hold their attention in a way that's almost like if I want to get them to do something else or leave, it can become a bit difficult, but his interest in them is so strong. And I've always really appreciated that. And you know, it can sometimes go in the direction of, you know, I know somebody else from the country that you are from, but the interest is so genuine and the empathy is so strong that he's generally always been able to make really strong connections with people. Yeah, so I would say just, I guess, a final note, because I could go on for a long time, but I'll give other people a chance to go on. Another legacy I think that he's left for me that I was not expecting, because in my family we generally have sort of a realist way of, and since then we've had a bit of a family joke that around major events in my life he would have some sort of major flare-up. So also when I graduated from Yale, he then again landed himself in hospital again so that was a theme that seemed to keep happening. These pictures here, I hope you all get a chance to come and see them more closely, and I hope that they roll through, and you get to see a little bit later on, there will be a bunch of pictures of me climbing all over my grandfather when I was a toddler. Because that was the first thing that I understood about him, was that he was a really good jungle gym. And I made a lot of use of that. It was one of the first things we started to find when going through old pictures, is lots of pictures of me climbing on my grandfather. And so that was my introduction, but as I moved into the verbal phase, the other things I remember early on is him teaching me Yiddish phrases, and especially Yiddish insults, which I won't repeat, except for one very important one, shmegegi. And I don't know who started it, but somebody started the tradition of calling each other shmegegi. So he would call me and Ian shmegegi, and we would call him shmegegi right back, and that just was a tradition that we had for a while. And he also started to teach me the Hebrew alphabet, which I still remember, oddly enough, though I never actually then started to study Hebrew. But he very much valued us understanding our family history, so this also connects to the work that he started to do into our genealogy, so that was a theme that seemed to keep happening. These pictures here, I hope you all get a chance to come and see them more closely, and I hope that they roll through, and you get to see a little bit later on, there will be a bunch of pictures of me climbing all over my grandfather when I was a toddler. Because that was the first thing that I understood about him, was that he was a really good jungle gym. And I made a lot of use of that. It was one of the first things we started to find when going through old pictures, is lots of pictures of me climbing on my grandfather. And so that was my introduction, but as I moved into the verbal phase, the other things I remember early on is him teaching me Yiddish phrases, and especially Yiddish insults, which I won't repeat, except for one very important one, shmegegi. And I don't know who started it, but somebody started the tradition of calling each other shmegegi. So he would call me and Ian shmegegi, and we would call him shmegegi right back, and that just was a tradition that we had for a while. And he also started to teach me the Hebrew alphabet, which I still remember, oddly enough, though I never actually then started to study Hebrew. But he very much valued us understanding our family history, so this also connects to the work that he started to do into our genealogy, about our past and where we came from. And he began also teaching me about Israel-Palestine from when I was quite young, and teaching me about his own involvement, which, yes, okay, everyone recognizes that. So that was the other thing that my grandfather started to do with me and with Ian, but especially after we'd arrived home, arguing about things like the existence of God, and that also became a favorite. Yeah, so I would say that this theme of social justice, to come back to that, the underlying theme for my grandfather, I think, is they'll lean forward, they'll start to smile slightly, they'll start asking them questions. He will hold their attention, because his attention is so focused on them. He will hold their attention in a way that's almost like, if I want to get them to do something else or leave, it can become a bit difficult, but his interest in them is so strong.
Well, first I have to say that was a very impressive remembrance by Becky, and it's kind of, I'm sure Joel's very proud of his granddaughter. So this is something, excuse me for a second. This is for my mother. She sent this for me to read, and my mother, Ursula, and my dad, Ron, moved to St. Louis, and along with me, Eric, and my brother Phil, and my sisters Susan and Judith, and very soon after we moved there, my father passed away. So Joel and Kathy were instrumental in supporting us at that time. My mom basically said, "Joel, Sunrise Trupin, some memories about our treasured friend." And then she gave a couple of quotes in Yiddish, which I don't think I'll try to say in Yiddish, but the first one means the highest wisdom is kindness. And the second one is, you can't get change with keeping quiet. She said, we first met Joel in 1966 when he joined the Department of Microbiology at St. Louis University Medical School, where he met Ron, who had recently joined the faculty. Joel, Kathleen, and Michael moved to University Avenue and soon purchased a house around the corner from us on Yale. Our families became close friends. Joel was always generous, stimulating, challenging, but supportive and patient, able to cheer you when you needed and call you Yiddish names affectionately. Camping trips. This was in the late 60s, and hitchhiking was a great form of transportation for hippies. As we approached one on the road, all the kids would yell, "No, no, Joel, don't pick up that hitchhiker. They're going to smell." And like clockwork, we could feel the big van slow down, and the sliding door would open to welcome the next guest to our camping trip. Yes, not only would Joel pick up hitchhikers, but he would befriend them, and they would frequently join us for the rest of the trip. I will always remember Joel as a true mensch. In fact, as a kid, I always thought I would want to marry a man like Joel Trupin. So that's for sure.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you, Ursula and Judith, for sharing those memories. The hitchhiker stories are really on track for everything. From all the stories I heard from him, and actually his growing up too, I know that he had picked up a lot of hitchhikers when he was young too.
Thank you, Ian. So I'll just throw out a few remarks about Joel. I think other than Catherine and Jean, I've known Joel longer than anyone else here today. I remember him from when I was 3, which is far more than 54 years ago. And I would agree that even as a child, I had the same idea about Joel, that he was really engaging of children, and certainly was a very good friend. And then, of course, they were away for many, many years, but fortunately came back a decade or so ago, so I've gotten to know Joel quite well over the past decade. We had a lot of conversations over those 10 years, and I think I really got to know him quite well. And he was quite flattering to me as a scientist. He knew a lot more science than I do, but we had a lot of conversations about scientific topics and so forth. So I really, really treasure that. But I thought I'd just mention a few other things about Joel that probably most people here are aware that Joel really had a kind of a tenuous grasp on reality. He had the faintest perception of that his memory was better than hers when he came to sunrise. As for Catherine, Michael, and the kids, I'll let them speak for themselves as they have. But I think his love and regard for them was constantly expressed. As I said, I saw Joel nearly every day and enjoyed our many conversations and learned many things from him. Some organic chemistry, the biology of keloids, some Yiddish, and I remember the word shmagegi as well. Fortunately, I don't think he ever applied it to me. But we agreed that his final illness really was mishigas. It was really craziness. I hope that I learned a little of his patience and graciousness toward others. Like Becky, I could go on with more, but I will stick with my perception of time and close now.
Thank you, Arthur. And I wonder if maybe even more than anyone, Arthur has really been someone who listened to my grandfather and kept track of his genealogical research over the last few years, as much as anyone, really. And I know that the family tree research he was doing always tied my brain in knots. And so I just really thank you, Arthur, for all the things that you've been for my grandfather, but also just a great conversation partner over the years. Really appreciate that. I'd like to invite next one of my grandfather's very dearest and longest-term friends, Shirley Russell. I know you have something prepared for us.
First, I want to say that I just agree with everything everybody said. And knowing Joel for 50 years has been a great joy for me. And he certainly was funny, and he certainly was a dreamer. And all of the things people said are true. But I guess I would like to focus on a little bit more of what he actually was, the articulation of a dream. And that was the things he was able to accomplish the times I knew him, both during his time at Meharry and also after his time at Meharry. I met Joel in 1970 when he came to Meharry Medical College to interview for a faculty position. There was a newly formed graduate school, and he joined that and the Department of Biochemistry. My husband and Jim and I had recently joined the faculty with the goal of helping to build a PhD training program and to develop a strong interdisciplinary research effort in the graduate school. Joel poked his head into our temporary office space, and we immediately became friends. And this, of course, everyone has stressed that Joel showed great interest in everyone he met. I soon learned that though our backgrounds were somewhat different, we were both children of Jewish immigrants who had fled Europe to find a better life in the U.S. We'd actually lived in the same city, Newark, New Jersey, for a short time, where I grew up. Joel's brother Gene and I attended the same high school for several years, although we didn't know each other. So Joel joined the faculty at Meharry about a year after we did, and although initially he thought he was going to contribute mainly to teaching programs, especially with another founding member of the graduate school, Joe Galley. But we convinced him early on to join our effort to begin an interdisciplinary research program to study keloids, a disfiguring and sometimes disabling disorder of wound healing that disproportionately affects individuals of African ancestry and was very understudied. The first literature search I had showed only about, maybe 50 publications, whereas other things have thousands of publications. Jim and I are geneticists, and Joel was a biochemist. Kathy Trupin was expert in the growing of cell cultures and was also drawn into the project. And so for many years, the four of us formed the core of the effort, although other collaborators were identified within and outside of Meharry and made major contributions. So, although elucidating the genetic and biochemical basis of keloids was our primary scientific goal, our interest went way beyond science. We were committed to bring this disorder and other potentially related fibrotic disorders to the attention of the broader scientific community and to address the serious health disparity that had previously received little attention. We were also committed to training PhD students to address understudied research problems and to increase the number of PhD students of African ancestry, which was very low. To our knowledge, there was only one African American PhD in genetics when we began our program.
Jim, Joel, and I trained 9 PhDs and several master's students in genetics and biochemistry, and were involved in the training of hundreds of other African American PhD medical and dental students in genetics, biochemistry, microbiology, immunology, and molecular biology. We continued that effort over nearly 50 years, with Joel continuing to contribute to keloid research even after he retired and moved to Vermont. We continued to communicate regularly about the work, even as he became very ill. I believe that one reason I have not retired is because he kept pushing me to continue the effort, even after I moved to Vanderbilt in 2004. He never gave up on wanting to pursue unfinished projects. One example is a student whose PhD work at Meharry was focused on identifying the gene that caused keloids in a familial pedigree. Although a chromosomal region of interest was identified, the gene itself was not. Several years ago, after the ex-student had relocated from Virginia to a faculty position in Alabama, Joel decided that using more current techniques, she should make a further attempt. We identified collaborators, and Joel even came to Nashville, and we visited her in Alabama to try to move the project along. Ultimately, it didn't happen, but Joel never gave up. That is the way he was. I believe it was due to this overwhelming desire to make things better that we made the progress we did. This, I should say, was true of many things, always trying to make things better. With regard to myself, Joel was always the most encouraging and supportive colleague and friend. He edited, albeit slowly, every grant and manuscript I ever wrote. He was expert at improving how things were expressed, although I have to say that occasionally, in his zeal to improve my somewhat wordy style, he would remove an important word that would alter the meaning and have to be added back or changed to something else. He was a wonderful friend to me and to many, many others. Every day I will suddenly want to call and tell him something, or I will miss him always. I will miss him always.
I'm really honored to speak at this event. Back to the early 60s at the University of Illinois where we lived, and we dating back, I think, to the year that Nobel Prize, and that was for determining the genetic code, which directs the building blocks to the apparatus which assembles them, and subsequently the group actually worked out all of the code words, and for this great accomplishment, the head of the group, the late Marshall was awarded the Nobel Prize. And as you've already heard from Shirley, Joe did quite amazing work on the genetics and biology of keloid formation. And of course, you've all heard about, maybe I can position myself better here. Okay. And we, dating back, I think, to the year that Nobel Prize, and that was for determining the genetic code, which directs the building blocks to the apparatus which assembles them, and subsequently the group actually worked out all of the code words, and for this great accomplishment, the head of the group, the late Marshall was awarded the Nobel Prize. And as you've already heard from Shirley, Joe did quite amazing work on the genetics and biology of keloid formation. And of course, you've all heard about, maybe I can position myself better here. Okay. And but the most well, I just mentioned where we went. The most well, I just mentioned where we went, and also to Mount Desert Island, and the Acadia National Park, and even to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan one year. But in Colorado.
That's right. Yeah, not to understand. Some of the to him.
Subsequently, the group actually worked out all of the code words, and for this great accomplishment, the head of the group, the late Marshall was awarded the Nobel Prize. And as you've already heard from Shirley, Joe did quite amazing work on the genetics and biology of keloid formation. And of course, you've all heard about, maybe I can position myself better here. Okay. Or maybe I can just remove it. Yeah. So I was also part of the famous Trupin camping trips. Yeah, and in one of them, the famous van broke down somewhere in Kansas. Russell, Kansas, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that was the home of Bob Dole, I think. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but the most well, I just mentioned where we went to the Colorado Rockies. And also to Mount Desert Island and the Acadia National Park, and even to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan one year. But in one of the famous trips to Colorado, which was in Gunnison, I, with all of my administrative abilities, flew out one day early, and because I gotten the date wrong, and I, accused them of showing up a day late. It was actually my fault, but I bought myself a whole backpacking outfit and took off backpacking, and then they showed up. But I continued backpacking for many years. But most of all, I want to say that Joel was one of the most compassionate, kind, sincere individuals that I ever met, and his great warmth and generosity will be sorely missed by us all.
All right, thank you, Bob. Next up, I would like to invite my father, Michael, Joe's son, to say a few words. And also, I think you have some things from on behalf of people who are not here, or yeah, okay, Marilyn, right, Joe's sister. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. I'll try. Yeah, I'll try the stand here. Then I can hold this. Okay. I think I'm mostly off the hook because I think other people have covered things pretty well. In some of the last bits of time with my dad, he thought a lot more about some of his earliest recollections. He did want to be remembered, so don't forget him, okay? He was remembering like the last words of his father was, "Don't forget me." And his father was a huge inspiration to him. As you see in the obituary, his father became blind when he was still a fairly young man, and the rest of the family was very much engaged in helping him negotiate the world despite his blindness. And one of the things my dad was returning to, probably his dearest recollection, was when he was really small, sitting on his father's shoulders and directing him by pushing his cheeks one way or another. and so, I guess that sort of orientation underlay a lot of his empathy. In the Depression, they had it hard like everybody else, but they rolled with it. They hitchhiked as a family, and hitchhiking was always very fondly regarded by my dad as a means of transport. So that kind of explains why he was inevitably going to pick up any hitchhiker, no matter how disreputable they might appear. And Now, he's one of three children. The baby of the family, Jean, who is with us today, where's is right there. He's 6 years younger. But their sister Marilyn is just about a year and a half older, and unfortunately, her skeleton is so troublesome that she's not able to be here today. But so I was just asking her today what she would want to say, and she just really wanted to emphasize what a wonderful brother he was, and that that through there were all these movements of the family, first from Michigan, from the first iteration of the cooperative farm to the remnant, which went to Virginia, and then from there to Spring Valley, New York. Everybody else was older. They were the only two little kids, and so they were very much thrown upon each other for entertainment and adventures. They also, I mean, as adults, what all of us are, and especially elderly adults, what we're all very well aware of is that they would engage in the most violent arguments, but and as Arthur was saying, there was a lot of strong disagreement about what happened when and who was where, but they were very close, and they were left to their own devices, and they had various adventures. There was a goat that had kids. I think it was goats, and there was these kids needed to be. They weren't going to be raised under the current circumstances, and so their father had arranged for the butcher to come and collect them, and so Joel and Marilyn hid the goats, and at least averted their end. The guy came and I think had to leave again. I didn't, because couldn't find them. And later, when the two of them went to college, Marilyn went to Brandeis. My dad was at Cornell. Times were not always easy for her at Brandeis, but he hitchhiked from Cornell to Brandeis twice, and I think it was hitchhiking. I think that was one of the times where he stayed overnight in the county jail, at the invitation of a policeman. I think he was not in trouble, but that was comfortable. Yeah, I think in the slides there's maybe pictures of that visit, and so the camping trips are big touchstones in our lives. I mean, there weren't that. They started in the late '60s. There were like 4 of them in successive summers that involved Rolfs and us and various other family members. But what happened reliably was that my dad would be with the kids, and he would disappear with the kids, whether it was in a rubber dinghy out on Lake Superior with no life jackets, or God knows where up in the mountains, and my mom and other people were sort of left not knowing, and they wouldn't return forever, and there was like a major point in a camping trip where we were going either west or east, and he was with the van and the kids, and he got separated, and my mom and another mother were in in the Beetle, and they had to like ask at police stations in different places. You know, cell phones might have really made for a lot fewer stories, but yeah. So and that goes back to his sense of reality and focusing on a few things. And I'm not. I wouldn't say too much else. He used to love to try to explain any science that he was thinking about or doing to me and to others. And a lot of times, I wasn't patient. But it would be at the dinner table, and he would be scrawling stuff on napkins, and I would get very exasperated with him but he would be very insistent because he wanted people to understand. And I think that's about all I'll say. There's a lot of, if anybody's interested in joining me sometime, there's a lot of bent nails that he collected over the years that need to be straightened.
Thanks, Daddy. So please forgive me if there's anyone who had a prepared statement that I didn't remember to put in line, but I'd really like to open it up now to whoever has anything they'd like to share about my grandfather. And there's really no set... there's really no set schedule at this point, but we're here for as long as folks like this afternoon. And I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's stories, how Joel affected you, and what are the things that you remember most about him. I think I've had several stories mulling around in my head, and I didn't really want to pick a single one, but I think one of my earlier memories of my grandfather that really I came back to a lot in his last few months was of visiting Nashville in the summer. And I would get a little bored, I think, and hot and around the house. And so I'd go into work with him sometimes in the morning. And he knew I was very interested in bugs. I like to go around and examine under every leaf and every rock. And he had a close friend who was working on the genetics of fruit flies, or using fruit flies in the lab. And so he'd just take me to work and drop me off in the Dorer lab, Doug Dorer, and I'd sit on a microscope there and count all the fruit flies that had yellow eyes and red eyes and black eyes and funny wings. And I'd really get into it for an hour or two or three, I don't know. And then he'd pick me up. And every visit to Meharry Medical College, where my grandfather worked at the time, was really a visit, it felt like, to the whole microbiology department, because every few steps there'd be an open door and he'd look around the corner and he'd say, "Oh, hi, so-and-so," and there'd be stories and he'd introduce me. And so, I mean, I think most people can probably reflect on that, but he's really a people person. He's a person who'd really never end a conversation, and a person who really wanted to connect with everybody at all times. So I will miss that about him. And with that, I would like to I'll put the mic here. Unfortunately, we don't have a cordless mic, so, but really, I welcome to people to come up here and share whatever you'd like to, and continue enjoying. There's a lot of food left, and a lot of simple cider and other drinks. So thank you.
So I'm going to go first and read a statement by Ellie Teal, who is basically part of our family, Chris's daughter, who unfortunately can't be with us in person today, but she sent some notes. And Ellie is like my sister. Essentially, we grew up together, and so she's has this to say about Grandpa. I've had the privilege to know Joel all my life. The Trupins were the next-door neighbors of my family for roughly 40 years. But over time, they became more than just friends and neighbors. They are my family, and I am proud to have counted Joel as a grandfather too. He appears in my baby albums and in photos of backyard birthday parties and holidays. Joel is a fixture in countless memories of the everyday mundane, school pickups, family dinners, and sleepy Saturday afternoons parked in front of the receiver listening to the Met broadcast. He was the most genial of grandfathers, silly beyond compare, and forever proffering this or that scientific article he had just read or contributed to. As a lifelong learner, he always pushed Rebecca, Ian, and me to strive toward our full potential. And he let us each know in his way how very proud he was of each of us. As a grandfather, though, he was a storyteller like no other. His sense of timing and the mischievous twinkle in his eyes made stories of the family lore worthy of multiple hearings. Once riding in the car and hoping for one such narrative, I asked him to tell me a story. So I will leave you all with the same story. It was midnight on the ocean. Not a streetcar was in sight. The sun was shining brightly, though it rained all day that night. And the captain said to the shipmate, "Mate, tell me a story." And the story went like this. It was midnight on the ocean.
I don't know if you noticed the picture that started out this group of my sister and Joel standing in front of the barns at the Sunrise Farm in Michigan. Joel would have been about 3, maybe Marilyn 5, something of that sort. And there was a heading under it describing where they were. There was an omitted subtitle, which was Sibling Rivalry. Which was a major formative factor in their lives. So things were not all perfect. One of the things that there was sort of a history of politics in the family. My father, the Sunrise Farm was largely anarchist and started out with anarchist groups from New York and Detroit. And my Uncle Dan, who was my father's younger brother, was a communist. So in those days, it was anarchists versus communists, and they had enormous political battles all through those years. So that was the environment that sort of affected us. One of the other things was storytelling that ran all through our history. Michael mentioned Joel saying he had stayed over at a local jail. And Joel and I used to compete. I did a lot of hitchhiking. He did a lot of hitchhiking. And I was always trying to match him when I went traveling. So once on a cross-country hitchhiking trip in Ames, Iowa, I got stuck at night. And remembering his story, I went to the local jail, and I said, "Can you guys put me up for the night?" And they said, "Oh, sure, we'll give you the suite overlooking the river." And they... I slept all night in the drunk tank. But anyway. The other thing in our family was storytelling. And my father wrote his memoirs, which I think was in real time. It was like 900 pages printed on both sides, and I took the first volume and I gave it to our uncles, and I said, "Read this and tell me the real story." And then I got their version of the thing, and we got just really wonderful stories back of what happened in the immigrant period back in the early 1900s. And an example of that story, which came from my uncle Archie, was they were living downtown Manhattan, somewhere around. They had a store somewhere around 14th Street, I think. And Archie, and this was one of the greatest stories from his memoirs that I printed up. He came home. He was a latchkey kid, and he came home after school, and he opened the door and he went inside, and he saw a pair of man's legs sticking out from under his bed. And he panicked totally, and he fled down to the store, and he told our grandmother, his mother, "There's a man under my bed, there's a man under my head." And they said, Shut up, that's Alexander Berkman. He sneaked down from Canada. to visit his girlfriend Emma Goldman. She's on trial in Manhattan. She was on trial with Margaret Sanger for anyway. So the family was poor, but they had these connections to the politics of that era, which ended up with them being at the Sunrise Cooperative Farm. I don't have any further thoughts except having spent a lifetime going places and doing things with my brother. The one primary thought that comes to my mind today, the thought is, this party gathering was planned a long time ago. It was scheduled for 1 o'clock. Everybody else is here. Where the hell is Joel?
I have something very short.
Yeah.
It just came up. He had a bucket of bent nails, right? Well, I took a house down in Waterbury and brought it back. And in the backyard, I had to de-nail all that. And then I straightened every nail. You did learn that. I'm using the rest of my life.
So it's not just my dad.
I have a reminiscence about Joel as well. I'm Dan Choderkoff. After he and Kathy had moved back to Marshfield, and we were introduced by Bill Tchaikovsky at Rainbow Suites. And Bill knew that I had an interest in anarchism, and he said, "There's somebody you've got to meet." And he introduced me to Joel. And at the time, I was writing a book, and I had a character who spent time at the Sunrise Cooperative community, which I had only read about. And I'd actually made a study of it. I'd gone into the archives, I'd read unpublished memoirs, a couple of books about it. And when I met Joel, it was just extraordinary, because here in Marshfield, Vermont, was an actual alumnus of the Sunrise community, which was really remarkable. It was a 10,000-acre farm in Michigan, outside of Lansing, Michigan. It was started by New York and Michigan anarchists. And they had a peppermint mill, they had grew vegetables. It was a real working community, real farm. And he told me, he gave me his father's unpublished memoir, which I read, all 900 pages of. And he had incredible stories that he shared with me about what went on there, some of which actually made their way into my book. But one that sticks in my mind was he described to me a huge political struggle that went on there about whether to talk to the cows in the dairy herd in Yiddish or in English. And apparently they spent months debating. And we became fast friends, and virtually every Friday night from then on, our families shared a table at Rainbow Suites. And I also come from a Jewish family, and obviously neither Joel or I were very observant, because we'd be eating pepperoni pizza on Friday night. But I always told people that that was our Shabbat, our Sabbath, which traditionally, Jewish families gather on Friday night and share a meal. And that was pepperoni pizzas at Rainbow Suites on Friday nights.
Well, what I loved about that was that, along the same lines as solving the Israeli-Palestine problem, was that he was sure that we were going to solve it, that everyone had been interpreting the Second Amendment wrong, and that the Supreme Court was wrong, which is true, and solve the problem of gun safety, and he was to have total faith in that. And I just the other thing, so he came to my house and we had this long talk about it, and he among other things really wanted me to know about Kathy, how much respect he had for her as an intellect and as a person and as a scientist, and I don't know, I will never forget that, and truly a beautiful human being came into my house that day, and I'll never forget it, how much respect he had for her as an intellect and as a person and as a scientist, and I don't know, I will never forget that, and truly a beautiful human being came into my house that day, and I'll never forget it,
Got to talk to Sandy. Finally he comes down to our house in Montpelier, and he's got this big folder. He had been collecting his notes, and he'd been preparing a Supreme Court argument. And no, that was perfect, because that was setting perspective, and I had a different one, so thank you. And so we had the same experience. So Joel presents his legal argument, and Sandy, in her brilliant fashion, is showing him where the holes were. And it was obvious that he was a brilliant scientist. His legal mind may not have been quite as sharp. And so his argument, there were some flaws in there. And then at the end of the discussion, basically he closes the file, recognizing that maybe his argument is not complete. He just looks at us and goes, but it's wrong. That was the end of our discussion.
Thank you, Steve and Sandy. I just want to actually encourage folks.
Since I'm a librarian, it's a little like being a bartender. Everyone comes in and tells you their stories. Only Joel and I weren't telling them over beer. We told them over books. And Joel came in often. Comes in, I say, Joel, I don't think I'm Jewish. You told me family tree DNA is the DNA for all Jewish people. You know, is the test for all Jewish people.
I have 130 people, fifth and sixth cousins in my DNA. So Joel comes in, I say, Joel, I don't think I'm Jewish. You told me family tree DNA is the DNA for all Jewish people. You know, is the test for all Jewish people. I have 135 people who are matching me, and they're like sixth and seventh cousins. He says, oh, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. I'm sure it's not true. something like that. And he was kidding with me because it was sort of a shock. Anyway, needless to say, he got me started. I've done 2 more DNA tests from 2 different companies. I still don't know anything about my past, but it's been an interesting journey. Thank you.
Unless we're gonna, we can fill. Unless we're gonna upload a. No, but we're not. Well, my husband.
I know someone who works at my
It's just that they got rid of different sections. We can put 35 days in the
Oh, I worked at, no, with the Ratty. At the Ratty. Oh, you worked there too? Yeah, a few years later.
Yeah, I also did both, but I did not work in the dining hall. I was mostly a cafe person.
Oh, there's nothing to see a shop yet. Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Yeah, you did like
do the hostess without serving utensils.
No,
And I think I remember she
that's
wanted these.
that is so much fancy. I was literally at the science
You know, just in terms of.
so there's
See, there wasn't.
Oh, okay.
People just went up there and jumped out.
Oh,
No, that's
And it's on a track. It's an ex-white truck. Okay. But he kept grabbing the pig.
I'm getting dizzy. I am dizzy.
Cool.
Initially on this anarchist collective farm, I don't know how anarchist his dad was, but enough to create an anarchist collective. They were. He was telling me, like, relatives in Brooklyn were here. Stand up, my house looks the other direction. You go with it.
Hello.
You can't see anything. Which is, you know, it's nice to move to the big city. Oh,
I'm in White River Junction.
it's a big delta.
And then, okay.
So just say something about happy whatever this event is, or what a great event. Just say something like that.
We're just here and we're super happy to remember Joel. I know Joel was the fastest upper depot walker I think I've ever seen when he was in his 80s, crushing it up the hill every day when it was like 90 degrees.
He inspired us every day.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Some woman's got a horse for a horse.
They said if you cut it out, they're very tempered and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the only thing that we could think of in terms of an African great grandpa's beautiful Spain.
There you go. That's right. That's good. Down the front. Palm Beach. Yeah,